Welcome to video number 2 for Mrs. Feighery's Honors U.S. History 2, Chapter 27, Empire and Expansion. When we last left off, there was trouble in Cuba. Cuba had revolted against Spain, citing years of misrule. And in the wake of the situation becoming worse, after the Cubans torched their sugar, and Spanish General Butcher Weyler goes to Cuba to crush the revolt, he kills many civilians and puts them into concentration camps, and the American public is left clamoring for action. The yellow presses competed against each other to come up with more sensational stories. Hearst even sent artist Frederick Remington to draw pictures of often fictional atrocities. For example, he drew Spanish officials brutally stripping and searching an American woman when in reality, Spanish women, not men, did such acts. Then suddenly, on February 9, 1898, a letter written by a Spanish minister to Washington, Dupuy de Lome, that ridiculed President McKinley, was published by William Randolph Hearst. On February 15th of that year, the U.S. battleship the USS Maine mysteriously exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 260 officers and men. Despite an unknown cause, America was war-mad, and therefore Spain received the blame. Hearst called down to Cuba and said, "You supply the pictures, and I'll supply the story." What really happened was that an accidental explosion had blown up the ship, a similar conclusion to what Spanish investigators suggested, but America ignored them. The American public wanted war, but McKinley privately didn't like war or the violence, since he had previous experience as a Civil War officer. Wall Street didn't want war because it would upset business. However, on April 11, 1898, the president sent his war message to Congress anyway, since, number 1, war with Spain seemed inevitable, number 2, America had to defend democracy, and number 3, opposing a war could split the American people. Congress adopted the Teller Amendment, which proclaimed that when the U.S. had overthrown Spanish misrule, it would give the Cubans their freedom and not conquer it. On paper, at least, the Spanish had the advantage over the U.S. It had more troops and supposedly a better army, as well as younger and seemingly more daring generals. Navy Secretary John D. Long and his Assistant Secretary Theodore Roosevelt had modernized the U.S. Navy. On February 25, 1898, Roosevelt cabled Commodore George Dewey, commanding the American Asiatic Squadron at Hong Kong, and told him to take over the Philippines. Dewey took over the islands from the Spanish. Dewey had naval control, but he could not storm the island and its fortresses, so he had to wait for reinforcements. Meanwhile, other nations were moving ships into Manila Harbor to protect their men. The German Navy defied the American blockade regulations, and Dewey threatened the Navy commander with war, but luckily this episode blew over, due in part to the British assistance of America. Finally, on August 13, 1898, American troops arrived and captured Manila, collaborating with Filipino insurgents, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, to overthrow the Spanish rulers. On July 7, 1898, the U.S. annexed Hawaii so that it could use the islands to support Dewey, supposedly, and Hawaii received full territorial status in 1900. The Spanish sent warships to Cuba, panicking Americans on the eastern seaboard, and the fleet, commanded by Admiral Cervera, found refuge in Santiago Harbor, Cuba. It was promptly blockaded by a better American force. American ground troops, led by General William R. Shafter, were not prepared for combat in the tropical environment. An example of that is that they were wearing woolen long underwear, which was very hot. The Rough Riders, a regiment of volunteers led by Theodore Roosevelt, and Colonel Leonard Wood rushed to Cuba and battled El Caney, storming up San Juan Hill. Admiral Cervera was finally ordered to fight the American fleet, and his fleet was destroyed. On land, the American Army, commanded by General Nelson Miles, met little resistance as they took over Puerto Rico. Soon afterwards, on August 12, 1898, Spain signed an armistice. If the Spaniards had held out for a few more months, they might have won, for the American army was plagued with dysentery, typhoid, and yellow fever. Finally, Teddy Roosevelt wrote a round-robin letter demanding that the U.S. government remove the troops before they all died of these diseases. In negotiations in Paris, America got Guam and Puerto Rico and freed Cuba. The Philippines were a tough problem, since America couldn't honorably give it back to Spain after decades of misrule and couldn't just take it like an imperialistic nation. So McKinley decided to keep the Philippines, even though they had been taken one day after the end of the war, because of popular public opinion and because it meshed well with business interests. The U.S. paid $20 million for the islands. Upon the U.S. taking of the Philippines, an uproar broke out, since until now, the United States had mostly acquired territory from the American continent, and even with Alaska and Hawaii and all the other scattered islands, there weren't very many people living there. This is the Works Cited page, and all the images used in this video are from the public domain.